So, welcome everybody. Welcome to this lecture where I would like to talk about a second generation currency crisis model. In order to motivate this theoretical analysis, I would like to talk about the exchange rate movement of the Swiss franc against the European euro. So in the beginning of the year 2010, it was a case that the exchange rate was at the level of 150 Swiss franc for 1 euro. Let's assume that you are going on a ski trip to Switzerland and you are a European citizen from the euro area, and the price of a ski rental is 150 Swiss franc. So, what does it cost to rent the skis in January 2010? You have to take 100 euros. You can exchange the 100 euros into 150 Swiss francs, and you can book your ski trip. So the price is equal to 100 euros. But then, in a 1.5 year period, it is the case that the exchange rate decreases almost to the level of 1. So what if the ski rental still cost 150 Swiss francs? How expensive is it now for a citizen from the euro area to go skiing in Switzerland? Yeah, you have to take 150 euros, convert them at the exchange rate of 1 Swiss franc per 1 euro into 150 Swiss franc, and then you can go ski and do the ski rental. So the price of a ski rental increased by 50%, in a 1.5 year time period due to this exchange rate movement. So this exchange rate movement here is a very severe burden for the Swiss export industry, which is exporting tourist services in our example. And therefore, it was a case that the Swiss central bank decided to implement a so-called lower floor of 120. This implies that the exchange rate was allowed to be higher than 120, but not lower than 120. More or less, we can say that the Swiss central bank implemented a fixed exchange rate at 120 Swiss franc per euro. So for some time period, this fixed exchange rate was in place, and the central bank was able to defend the border of 120 Swiss franc per euro. But then it was a case that here in the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, the central bank gave up the fixed exchange rate. A floating exchange rate system was implemented, and we can see a very big jump here, a extreme appreciation of the Swiss franc and a depreciation of the euro. So that's the setting. That's the motivation. And let's go to the second generation crisis model and try to come up with a theoretical explanation why the Swiss central bank gave up the 120 lower floor of the Swiss franc. So we are looking at this model of Obstfeld with multiple equilibria, and more or less the scale plays a very important role in this model. On the one part of the scale, we have the cost of keeping the fixed exchange rate system in place. It is the case that this loss function has two components. This first bracket here, there we have the difference between the target exchange rate, E star, and the fixed exchange rate. So in case that there is a difference between the target exchange rate and the fixed exchange rate, this will lead to a loss. The second component here, this symbolizes the expected change in the exchange rate. So in case that there are exchange rate expectations, in case that the financial agents believe that the system is unstable and the exchange rate will change, then the cost of keeping the fixed exchange rate system in place will be higher. Psi and eta, they symbolize some weights, so like positive weights. On the other hand side of the scale, we have the cost of a regime shift. So we are assuming that if the central bank gives up the fixed exchange rate system and switches from a fixed to a floating exchange rate system, this also comes with some kind of cost. It comes with some burden to our economy. And now it is the case that the central bank is trying to find out, like, which costs are higher, the cost of keeping the fixed exchange rate system or the cost of a regime shift. And when the cost of keeping the fixed exchange rate system become too larger than the cost of a regime shift, then the central bank will give up like the fixed exchange rate system. So it's a choice for the central bank to give up or to keep the fixed exchange rate system in place. Like a second generation crisis model, it is not clear whether the fixed exchange rate system will be abolished at all. It might be the case that the central bank will defend the fixed exchange rate system. So it's not completely clear whether the fixed exchange rate system will be given up or whether this is not the case. In a first step, I would like to motivate like this part of the loss function. This function psi, and then in brackets, the target exchange rate and the fixed exchange rate. Why is it the case that the target exchange rate is different from the fixed exchange rate? Let's have a look. Let's assume that in the initial setting, the price within Switzerland is 12 Swiss francs, and the price within the Euroland is equal to 10 euros. The exchange rate is at 120 Swiss francs per euro. So what happens if there is inflation in the euro area and the inflation rate is 20% in the euro area and no inflation in Switzerland? In case that there would be a floating exchange rate system in place, it would be the case that the prices in the euro area would increase by 20%. But like the floating exchange rate system would lead to a situation that the Swiss franc would appreciate and the euro would depreciate. So in a fixed exchange rate system, the floating exchange rate would serve like a buffer. Price shocks in the foreign economy do not transmit into the domestic economy. But what if a fixed exchange rate regime is in place? In a fixed exchange rate regime, the exchange rate is fixed, does not change, and the inflation in the foreign economy transmit into the domestic economy. So in a fixed exchange rate regime, price shocks in the foreign economy transmit into the domestic economy, and there would be one problem for Switzerland: imported inflation. Now, I use this I want to use this numerical example in order to motivate the term, why is there a difference between the target exchange rate and the fixed exchange rate? We could argue as follows. In case that there is a fixed exchange rate system in place, it would be very nice in case that we could change like the exchange rate, because then it wouldn't come to the phenomenon of imported inflation. Imported inflation wouldn't play a role. So when in this situation there is a high inflation rate in the euro area, the target exchange rate can differ from the implemented fixed exchange rate, and therefore, like this situation comes with a cost to the central bank. The cost is like imported inflation in Switzerland. So, this is like the motivation of this chapter. Let's talk about the first component of the loss function. Even in a fixed exchange rate regime, the optimal exchange rate E star might depart from the fixed exchange rate E bar. Like the optimal exchange rate is influenced, for example, by the monetary policy of the foreign central bank. In the Swiss euro area case, it is the case that the cost for Switzerland depends on the monetary policy of the ECB. In case that the domestic central bank sticks to the fixed exchange rate system, it incurs some cost, for example, in form of a higher domestic inflation rate. So the first component of the loss function is given by this relationship here. The second component of the loss function, when we are defending a fixed exchange rate system, it will be more costly in case that the private agents speculate against the fixed exchange rate system. So, for example, in case that there are depreciation expectations, it is the case that according to the UIP condition, the domestic economy has to raise the domestic interest rate. And this is mentioned like on the next slide. In the header of the slide, we have the UIP condition, R is equal to R star plus the expected change in the exchange rate. So in case that the financial agents build depreciation expectations for the domestic currency, in case that the expected change in the exchange rate is positive, then it is the case that the central bank would lose foreign exchange rate reserves, which leads to a contraction of money supply. So the central bank has to increase the domestic interest rate, which might lead to a recession. In case that there are appreciation expectations for the domestic currency, in case that it's expected that the exchange rate decreases, the central bank is forced to build up foreign exchange rate reserves in a currency which is perceived to be weak. So in the Swiss case, it is the case that the Swiss central bank has to buy euro-denominated assets, and euro-denominated assets are perceived to be weak. The central bank has to lower the domestic interest rate, which could lead to a boom or inflationary pressure. So the Swiss central bank has to lower the Swiss interest rate. And in case that the foreign interest rate has set the interest rate to the level of 0, so in case that R star is equal to 0, and there are still appreciation expectations, so that this one here is negative, it has to be the case that the domestic central bank has to implement a negative interest rate. I think that this slide motivates in a very nice way the last term. So why is it costly to a central bank in case that there are depreciation or appreciation expectations? So when it comes to our scale, we have talked about the left-hand side of our scale in detail. It might be the case that there is a difference between the target exchange rate and the fixed exchange rate, and it might be the case that the financial agents have depreciation or appreciation expectations. Let's talk about the other part of the scale, the right-hand side of our scale. Why is it the case that there might be some cost of a regime shift from a fixed to a floating exchange rate system? So the central bank has promised in the past a fixed exchange rate system. In case that the central bank cannot defend the peg, the central bank has to confess that its strategy was wrong. In case that a devaluation of the domestic currency occurs, the central bank has to confess that its own currency is less valuable than the foreign currency, and therefore we are assuming that there are some costs of a regime shift. We are assuming that these costs are constant. So in case that the central bank has to change the exchange rate, then the economy incurs some costs of C. That's it with respect to the first part, like motivation and basic equations. Let's perform like a scenario analysis. Scenario 1. The expectations are that the system is stable. So the financial agents expect that the central bank will keep the fixed exchange rate system in place. No expectations that the exchange rate will change. So, like the expected change in the exchange rate is equal to 0. How large is then the loss in case that the central bank would keep the fixed exchange rate system in place under these conditions? We can set one element of the loss function equal to 0. So this part drops out, and we only have one element in our loss function. So now a regime shift will occur in case that the loss of keeping the fixed exchange rate system in place is larger than the fixed cost of a regime shift, and the regime will be stable in case that the loss of keeping the fixed exchange rate system in place is smaller or equal to the fixed cost of a regime shift. Let's try to create a graph which symbolizes these two equations, and the graph is really very easy to understand. So in a first step, we have to think about what is displayed on the two axes. On the vertical axis, we have like the loss for the central bank. And on the horizontal axis, like we have the target exchange rate. In case that the target exchange rate is equal to the fixed exchange rate, then it will be the case that the term in brackets here is equal to 0. There is no loss because the target exchange rate is equal to the fixed exchange rate. There is no loss. L1 will be equal to 0. So in case that the target exchange rate is equal to E bar, then the loss is equal to 0. But in all other circumstances, there is a difference between the target exchange rate and the fixed exchange rate, and the loss is positive. And it is the case that the whole system here is like convex because of the fact that we take here like the square root. So like this line here, this concave line symbolizes the left-hand side of the scale. Now we also have to think about the right-hand side of the scale, the fixed cost. And we are assuming that the size of the costs are given by the green line. Now we have 2 points, A and D, where the cost of giving up the fixed exchange rate system is the same as the cost of keeping the fixed exchange rate system in place. This implies that when the target exchange rate E bar crosses the border D, it is a case that L1, the loss of keeping the fixed exchange rate system in place, is larger than giving up the fixed exchange rate system. So here, the central bank will abolish the fixed exchange rate system and a depreciation will occur. What about point A? In case that we are to the left of point A, it is also the case that the loss of keeping the fixed exchange rate system in place is larger than the fixed exchange rate, the cost of giving up the fixed exchange rate system. So the loss of keeping the fixed exchange rate system in place is larger than I'm very sorry. The loss of keeping the fixed exchange rate system in place is larger than the cost of a regime shift. So a regime shift will occur and an appreciation will occur. In case that the target exchange rate is in the area between A and D, the fixed exchange rate system will be stable. So this is the first scenario. Let's go back to the beginning. What are the characteristics of the first scenario? It is the case that in the first scenario, we assumed that the financial agents believe that the fixed exchange rate system is stable and therefore like the costs are relatively small, like one element of the cost function was abolished. Let's go to scenario 2. Like in scenario 2, we are expecting that the system is unstable, or like the financial agents are assuming that the system is unstable. So the financial agents expect that the central bank gives up the fixed exchange rate system and adjust the exchange rate to the target exchange rate. So in case that the central bank is giving up the fixed exchange rate system and a change in the exchange rate occurs, the central bank will adjust the system in a way that it automatically adopts the target exchange rate E star. So in case that a change in the exchange rate system occurs, the new exchange rate will be E star, the target exchange rate. So the loss, if the government defends the fixed exchange rate system in this situation, is as follows. The second component plays a role now, and we can insert the right-hand side of this equation instead of like delta expected exchange rate. When we do so, then it is a case that we have in brackets here the difference between the target exchange rate and the fixed exchange rate. This pops up 2 times in equation 6 so that we can write this term out of brackets. We are writing this term out of brackets, so we get L2 is equal to, like this psi plus the eta, and then the difference between the target exchange rate and the fixed exchange rate. So when we compare L2 and L1, it should become clear that L2 is like almost always larger than L1 because we have a second term here. So in the loss function L2, eta also plays a role, not only psi. So L2 is always larger than L1. There is only one exemption, and this will be clear when we look at the graph. Like only when E star is the target exchange rate is equal to E bar, the fixed exchange rate, then of course also the loss L2 will be equal to 0. But in each and every other case, it will be the case that eta plays a role and the loss L2 is larger than the loss L1. Therefore, it is the case that new borders play a role in scenario 2. The border B and the border C plays a role in scenario 2. An appreciation will already occur when the target exchange rate crosses border B, and a depreciation will occur in case that the target exchange rate crosses the border C. So the system is only stable in scenario 2 in case that the target exchange rate is between B and C. Furthermore, it is a case that we have like a very interesting area here. The interesting area is between A and B, and also between C and D. Why is this area so interesting? It is interesting insofar as in case that the target exchange rate is in the area between A and B, and the financial agents believe that the system is stable, the system will be stable. But when the financial agents believe that the system is unstable, then the system is unstable. So we have multiple equilibria here in this area between A and B, and also in the area between C and D. It is the case that when the financial agents believe that the system is stable, the system is stable. When the financial agents believe the system is unstable, then the system is unstable. So we have self-fulfilling expectations. When the agents believe system is unstable, the system will be unstable. Furthermore, it is the case that a financial crisis or like a currency crisis might fall like from heaven. It might be the case that we are in the area between A and B, and for a very long time period, the financial agents believe that the system is stable, but all of a sudden, the financial agents change their expectations and the system becomes unstable. We cannot observe the expectations. Like it's in the head of the financial agents, it's not an observable macroeconomic variable. So it might be the case that all the macroeconomic variables are the same. The macroeconomic variables do not change, but the expectations change and suddenly the system becomes unstable. Let's conclude for the first time. The range of fundamental factors over which a fixed exchange rate system can be fixed is larger if the agents believe in the fixed exchange rate system L1, scenario 1, compared to a situation where the agents expect a change in the exchange rate, scenario 2. In the scenario 2, the exchange rate system will be adjusted in case that point B or point C is crossed. If the exchange rate is expected to change, then the likelihood of a change in the exchange rate increases. In case that the target exchange rate is in the area AB or in the area CD, we have the phenomenon of multiple equilibria. The exchange rate system is stable. If the exchange rate system is expected that it is stable, and the exchange rate system is unstable if it is expected that the exchange rate system is indeed unstable. That's our first conclusion and already a very nice insight. In the last few slides, I would like to perform like another scenario analysis. I would like to analyze what happens if, in case that the adjustment costs C increase. Like, why could it be interesting for the central bank to increase the adjustment cost? Yeah, like when the cost of like a regime fix, when the cost of changing the exchange rate system are very high, it should stabilize like the fixed exchange rate system. So how can a central bank or a government increase the adjustment cost? Like in our case, the central bank just implemented like a fixed exchange rate at the level of 120 Swiss franc. And the central bank can change this exchange rate overnight. But like it could be also the case that we or the government implements a law that the exchange rate is fixed. And then this law cannot be changed so easily. So the cost of a regime shift would be higher in case that it's a law compared to the situation where the central bank can change the fixed exchange rate overnight. So, like the central bank and the government, they have the possibility to change the cost of a regime shift. And let's check what happens if the government and the central bank increase the adjustment cost C. So until now, we had this graph. Green line was in place. L1, L2 was in place. But now, the exchange rate system was stable in the area B and C. And we had the area of multiple equilibria between A and B and C and D. So what happens if the cost of making a regime shift increase? Then we can see here that suddenly we have new points like A prime, B prime, C prime, and D prime. We have new intersections. And it is a case that the fixed exchange rate system will be stable between the areas B prime and C prime. So when the cost of a regime shift increase, the system becomes more stable because even when the target exchange rate departs more from the fixed exchange rate, the system will still be stable between B prime and C prime. But it is also the case that the area where we have multiple equilibria increases. So previously, in the green scenario, it is the case that the multiple equilibria can only pop up between A and B. But in the blue scenario, it is the case that the multiple equilibria can pop up between A prime and B prime. So let's conclude for the second time. If the cost of an adjustment of the exchange rate level increase, the range of the target exchange rate for which the exchange rate system is stable becomes larger. So the whole fixed exchange rate system becomes more stable, which is indicated by this blue arrow here. But also the range of the target exchange rate for which multiple equilibria are possible increases. So the system becomes less stable. And here I'm talking about the size of this arrow here. the area for which multiple equilibria occur becomes larger. The distance between A prime and B prime is larger than the distance between A and B. So a trade-off emerges, and as we know, there is no free lunch. There is always a trade-off. Thank you very much for attending my lecture. So this was about a second generation crisis model. It might be the case that no crisis occurs at all. In case that we are like in this kind of area here, when the target exchange rate departs only a little bit from the fixed exchange rate, no crisis occurs. And it also depends very much on the expectations of the financial agents, whether the financial agents expect that the system is stable or the system is unstable. We have self-fulfilling prophecies. In case that the expectations change from the system is stable to the system is unstable, then a currency crisis can fall from heaven. So suddenly there is a currency crisis without any change of observable macroeconomic fundamentals, because like expectations are not observable. I hope that you liked this video. In case that you have questions, please comment below my video. So please have a nice day. Thank you so much. Bye bye.